Well, hey everyone, and welcome to eSpeaks, the show where we unpack how today's leaders are using technology to build smarter, more resilient organizations. I'm your host, Corey Knowles, and today we're exploring what it means to lead with global first finance and how companies can build scalable, compliant operations in an increasingly uncertain world. Joining me today is Rob Israch, president of Tipalti, where he helps global companies streamline their financial operations and prepare for the future. Today, we'll cover how automation, AI, and integrated platforms are helping finance teams tackle today's biggest challenges, from cross-border compliance and FX volatility to forecasting, risk management, and operational efficiency. Rob, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Good to have you. I guess first let's talk a little bit about the current reality, new reality, I should say, of global first finance. So many teams are under pressure right now to do more with less. What does global first finance really mean in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, I mean, it really is the nature of business has changed. Finance teams and the business operations teams no longer can just afford to operate within borders. Everything is cross-border, whether it's workflows, whether it's subsidiaries, whether it's suppliers. It's not the exception anymore. And so the way you have to think about running your business has to be with those processes in mind that support multiple jurisdictions, multiple subsidiaries, different entities, suppliers all around the world, multiple currencies. And the expectation is now you have to be able to handle all that without friction. The reality is that, most teams have to accelerate at a rapid scale. That's the expectation. 83% have seen workloads increase as business have gone more global and as the economy has changed. And the expectation is simply agility. You have to be able to absorb regulatory changes, tax, policy changes, change in the FX markets, and other disruptions that entering new markets bring to a business. And the expectation is the operations team, the finance team has to be able to manage that disruption with minimal operational obstacles. And so that is what global first finance ultimately comes down to.
It makes a lot of sense. So what's driving the shift, do you think, from viewing finance as a cost center to a strategic growth enabler?
Yeah, change is the new normal now, and disruption seems to happen every 3 months or so.
Yeah.
The business really needs finance at this point, expects finance to help guide the company, help forecast what the future is, help be able to navigate the company through the changes. They view the CFO and the Office of Finance as that partner to the CEO. It's really the center of intelligence. They have the information on what the version of the truth is for the business, and they have to help plan and navigate the business forward, anticipate obstacles, make sure there's enough cash on hand, make sure they have enough funding, and provide that data intelligence, leveraging the knowledge of the business, knowledge of trends, knowledge of external markets, knowledge of investment markets to help navigate the company through and predict patterns, identify forecasts, have scenario plans. And there's an expectation for, real-time data, visibility across the business, with finance helping navigate the rest of the businesses, helping it navigate the rest of the company through the different macro changes and through the volatility. And that means that finance can't be muddled down in the operational processes of the business. There's a rising expectation around this for the strategic partnerships. 74% of teams say they're being asked to play a strategic role in driving the business. So it's now the vast majority of what the business expects finance to help do. And if you're spending all your time on your operational processes, you can't. Automation is about freeing that bandwidth for finance so that they're not consumed by doing manual AP processes, supplier payments, reconciliation, and other time-consuming finance operations, reducing errors and the such, so they can free up their bandwidth, their team's time to actually help on the strategic tasks and activities necessary.
So how are technology and automation then helping finance leaders balance all of this, like growth, compliance, and control?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically about reducing the manual bottlenecks that escalate as a company scales, that it grows up and matures, as they go cross border, as they have different subsidiaries and entities, and just as they have more complexity that's introduced to the business. Right now, the average company loses about 72 days, for example, of work days on AP tasks. And if it's that high an amount of time you're spending, it's an essential component of your formula to get to operational efficiency. 64% of finance folks worry that the lack of AP automation actually limits their company's ability to scale. Those are pretty good, clear signs that it's time to invest. Integrating an AI-driven automation solution, it supports that efficiency that you need while you're growing fast and trying to still bend the curves towards profitability. Doing that right will improve visibility and controls for your business, strengthen auditability and governance of your company, and ultimately free up your finance talent to focus on strategic initiatives.
Well, on that note, let's talk a little bit about managing risk and dealing with the complexities that come with working across borders. When thinking of compliance and currency, how do AI and automation help reduce risk in multi entity, multi currency environments?
Automation creates that consistency across the different entities, across your different borders, across your different suppliers, essentially standardizing controls, reducing exposure to things like human error and fragmented processes you have. By having that standardization, by having AI look for anomalies across the business, whether it's fraud that's happening or patterns around that, whether it's validating tax information, making sure it's compliant, whether it's protecting against anti-money laundering by checking automatically against sanction screening using machine learning and pattern recognition, or just enforcing policy adherence. It essentially kind of puts those controls in place and also gives you an audit trail so you can see what patterns happen. If it missed the fraud or if it missed that pattern, at least you can see who did what when across your different divisions around the world. In a multi-subsidiary environment, you also need to provide your local staff with localized approvals. You're not going to have approvals going around the world, most likely. In most cases, that'll cause delays and issues. So you need localized approval commands by entity, and you need that system to recognize that. And yet, at the global side, you need oversight. You need to make sure it's consistent processes using one system with global visibility on the audit trails and the patterns and the such. So those are examples of where AI and automation can really contribute to a much better control environment.
That makes sense. So, what trends are you seeing around FX volatility and forecasting, and how are leading finance teams adopting?
Yeah, I mean, geopolitical shifts and all kinds of things happening in the environment these days destabilize your ability to forecast and budget. 34% of teams say economic and government policy changes have added volatility to financial forecasts, and that seems like it'll continue in the future, unfortunately. Leading teams are essentially adopting AI assisted forecast models where they can look at different scenario planning, look at the data in your business, and improve responsibility to currency swings and other changes that are happening. You also need to be increasingly on top of your cash flow. Of course, with all that volatility, including FX, across your different banks or different currencies or different entities, you really need to be on top of cash flow and the treasury processes. Whether you have a treasury person or it's a finance team doing it for you, you've got to have that visibility in place to be able to manage through those fluctuations as well.
So, with regulations tightening across regions, what advice do you have for finance leaders trying to stay compliant but without slowing down their operations?
Yeah, I mean, in this environment, you mentioned earlier about trying to do more with less. You're not going to be able to go to the CEO or the finance team itself and make an argument to add more compliance staff as you grow. It's going to be a difficult argument with pressures on everyone for profitability and reducing burn. So the advice is really build that compliance into your workflows. Once you build it into your processes and your workflows, you can then centralize approvals, centralize the vendor master record, standardize around what audit trails you need, centralize it under one system so it's much more efficient rather than relying on disconnected solutions. Teams are definitely struggling to keep pace globally. 72% say that evolving international tax regulations are difficult for them to manage, and increasingly. And by building into your workflows and then applying, centralizing and then applying automation to manage those processes, it makes sure that they stay fast and efficient while reducing the burdens on staff and the need to keep adding more staff to keep up with the changing regulations.
So many companies are adopting automation tools in a very piecemeal way. What does end to end automation look like when it's done right?
Yeah, it's going to be different business to business on your unique processes in your company, but it starts with looking at what your processes are, where are you going in the future, what are the most challenging, parts of the process that are holding back your ability to scale and to grow efficiently, what's the pain that's being caused, and then looking at those finance operational processes and mapping out. I would recommend starting in a more broad context. As you mentioned, a lot of people are approaching this piecemeal because they're only looking at a few of the immediate pain points and then jumping at a solution for that. Versus if you kind of whiteboard a little bit more and you look at your end-to-end process in the context of our conversation today, it might be like looking at your supplier onboarding processes. How do you approve invoices? How do you approve those invoices? PO matching, if you have that process, a procurement or purchase requisition process, if you have that. Of course, you have to pay your suppliers. And I wouldn't look at it as paying just in your local market, but all your markets, whether you have different subsidiaries, how do you pay suppliers around the world? How do you communicate to them about their payment status or if there's an issue or the such? Of course, your reconciliation of payments and that effect on the monthly close processes and other core processes you may have that are important. And look at it as a unified flow and the interaction dependencies from process to process. When you can actually address not only those unique pain points, but the interdependencies of the processes, that's where you get real kind of unlocks. And I'd look at it from a global organization perspective, not just your domestic organization or your domestic suppliers. Teams often still rely on manual tasks across the board.
Mm-hmm.
But if you apply automation right in a more holistic way, you should be able to really find major savings. Right now, finance professionals spend about 11 hours per week on manual AP work alone. And as you look broader, you kind of find even more time that's related to it.
Yeah.
When automation is done more holistically, those disjointed workflows are addressed and made much more efficient. You reduce errors, you accelerate approval workflows for sure, improve visibility, strengthen controls, and then your global operation ultimately has much more consistency and control built throughout, which helps you scale without adding more headcount as you keep growing.
Any chance you can share like a real world example of a company that used Tipalti to scale its global operations and what measurable results they achieved?
Yeah, sure. So I think one good example is Crade Music Group.
Mm-hmm.
They had an incredibly complex finance operation across a multi-subsidiary environment. They also had cross-border payments and just tons of manual processes and payment delays built throughout the process. They knew they had to address it, and they chose to automate their entire AP and payouts operation using Tipalti while integrating seamless into the ERP. They were using NetSuite, which is a more typical ERP for your kind of global type finance scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
The output was pretty impressive. They limited about 36 days of payment related workflows annually. They also manage that across 4 entities in one centralized system. And they now send, in that business model, it's important you send out to your talent, your suppliers, payments really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so while that wasn't the driver of the project, another benefit was that they're able to send out the payments 3 days after they receive the invoice, which has made them much more competitive in their marketplace. So those are some of the outputs that a company can expect. Generally speaking, if you apply that more end-to-end approach to automating your AP and finance operations workflow, we find that companies are typically automating about 80% of the time they were spending prior managing those workflows. I talked about a monthly close before. Typically, the monthly close cycle time accelerates about 25%. Payment errors usually reduced about 66%. And you're able to do this while also moving staff towards more strategic initiatives in the business,
Yeah.
reducing fraud and improving your risk controls. So there's a lot of benefits beyond the tangible as well.
That's impressive. So, how do integration and data visibility play into achieving scalability and resilience?
Yeah, I mean, a top barrier to automation is difficulty integrating with existing systems. 30% of the folks in a recent survey cited this as a primary challenge. So you definitely need to look at your interacting systems and your own process and make sure everything's integrated together. With that unified data, teams have stronger forecasting accuracy and decision making throughout volatility, which helps you ride through that and make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that better visibility supports governance, decision making, reduces risks, improves response time. And essentially, with that data unified, finance is able to make that transition towards more of an insights department versus a task department. And that is the expectation and direction finance needs to go through.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of finance leadership. How do you see the role of finance leader evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a transition. We've been talking about this for, I'd say, a decade, but I think with automation really maturing, AI really coming to play in the last few years, and just the business volatility, which is forcing businesses to change and increasing complexity. Finance leaders time to really step up and be that strategic guide to the business while managing risk, while managing processes and finance operations efficiently, working across different functions in the business and being that business partner that the business expects. The responsibilities and the expectations are expanding. There's an expectation that they are key contributors to adding resilience to the business, improving client compliance readiness, helping with digital transformation. Many, unfortunately, though, while there's that expectation really coming to head and AI is really, along with all this volatility, is forcing it, many are still fighting that manual drag, unfortunately. And it's because there's been a lot of procrastination or kind of attacking the problem in a one-off kind of manner.
Mm-hmm.
But the sense of urgency is increasing. 66% actually saw an increase in manual work last year, which is surprising. There had been progress
Wow.
you'd seen in various different research over time, but that manual work is increasing. I think because business is changing so fast that it's difficult to keep up with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it does require a much more proactive stance than it took in the future. And finance leaders need to be champions of automation and AI at this point. Otherwise, they just won't be able to keep up with that.
So I guess that's a good place to segue into regulation a little bit. What impact do you expect AI regulations could have on automation strategy and decision making?
Yeah, I mean, AI is going to increasingly require transparent controls, documentation, governance frameworks. Typically the regulatory environment is pretty delayed
Mm-hmm.
on doing that. So it will increase. On the finance side, teams already have started seeing the benefit. 31% of folks record or surveyed cite AI's role in fraud detection and risk monitor already, and we're in the early days. So there's a benefit from the regulation side of you can improve your auditability, you can find fraud before it happens, and it's better for risk monitor than before. We're using different types of analysis, less advanced, less contextual, and the such. And so leaders have to choose those platforms that prioritize explainability, data security, compliance readiness, and AI-based governance is definitely going to be not a nice to have, but a central pillar of your finance strategy. At the same time, you have to make sure you're choosing a partner that you trust, because as the regulations from the external governments and oversight bodies increase, they're going to want to make sure that you're working with someone who has the right regulation and oversight of their own business.
Mm-hmm.
They can trust to be financially reliable in the future.
Well, finally, what's one practical step a finance team can take today to prepare for this new era of global first operations?
Yeah, so I'd start by removing the biggest friction point. There's multiple surveys, you can find them on the web, of where the manual processes in finance are, and it's almost always accounts payable as the number one
Mhm.
most time-consuming function in finance. It currently eats about 11 hours per week of your average finance professional. It's consistently noted, like I said, in these surveys as the most time-consuming function in finance. By the way, the number two most time-consuming function is reconciliation. And guess what? What really impacts the reconciliation process? Accounts payable is one of the biggest inputs and delayers of a monthly close process. Um, and so, if you tackle accounts payable automation in a more holistic way and do it properly, you will also typically see your monthly close times accelerate by about 25%.
Wow.
Um, and so, it gives you a bit of a double win. So I think that's the place to typically start and address that part of the process. Um, Build a modernization roadmap that focuses on integration, scalability, rather than just deploying disjointed point solutions. They're going to break. They're going to just push the can down the road to a different problem set. And so you want to address multiple problems and multiple processes talking to one another. Many teams are. The good news is, well, we talked a little earlier about manual process are actually increasing, not decreasing.
Hmm.
Many teams are at least preparing. So the latest research I've seen says about 64% of companies have an AP modernization plan in place, and it's in the next 12 months. Typically, we've seen this research 24 months. So those kind of items that are causing the sense of urgency for change do seem to be coming to play, at least in the plans. We'll see about the execution, but at least you have a plan in place.
Right, right. Well, that's big. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing these insights on how finance leaders can scale with confidence, even in an uncertain world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Corey, and it was a good conversation.
Excellent. Well, for those watching and listening, you can learn more about Tipalti's approach to global first finance and explore case studies at Tipalti.com. We'll have the description right below the video here. I'm Corey Knowles. This has been eSpeaks. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.